Warning: the following episode contains elements of horror that may be unsuitable for listeners under the age of 13. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Beyond the Bizarre, a podcast curated to all things, well, bizarre. My name is Brianna, and I will be sharing with you urban legends, lore, ghost stories, and more from around our planet. Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Bizarre podcast. I'm Brianna, your host, and we are here with episode 11 of season 2 of the podcast. I hope that you all had a very nice weekend. I know I don't usually start off the show like this, but this past weekend was the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States. And it's hard to believe that it's been 20 whole years since that tragic day. On that day 20 years ago, the Twin Towers in the state of New York, the city of New York, were attacked and fell, killing so many people. The Pentagon was also attacked, killing so many people, and a plane also fell in the state of Pennsylvania where passengers tried to overtake the hijackers who were also heading to another location to cause more devastation. And it's just such a tragic day, and it's the most recent tragedy that we have that most of us in this generation remember and were alive and experienced, whether we were young adults, high schoolers, children. We remember what we were doing that day. And I wanted to also mention the Pentagon and the flight that went down in Pennsylvania, because whenever 9/11 is mentioned, it's always, never forget, and it has the Twin Towers, which is, of course, tragic, but the Pentagon was also hit, and another plane also went down, which lost more lives. So it's just a tragic day for the United States, for my home country. And I know that there's not a day that doesn't go by that the families that were impacted by the tragedy doesn't think about the ones that they lost, or the people who were in the city and even witnessed that, or in the vicinity that witnessed it. I know that there's not a day that doesn't go by that they don't think about it as well. And just our nation as a whole, like every year we observe it and we think about those lives lost. And like I said, it's just hard to believe that it's been 20 whole years when it seems like it was just yesterday. But tragedy has a way of just sticking around. But one thing I can say for sure is that that day was meant to break us as a nation, but I do believe that it in some ways made us stronger. And I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about just a little bit of that tragedy in my home country this past weekend. There was a lot of specials about it, educating people, who are just now coming of, and not going to say coming of age to know, because I'm sure they heard of it, but just now coming to where they have questions. Kids that were born that year, kids that were born a couple of years after that who are just now having questions. This is, like I said, the most recent tragedy the big tragedy that we've had in our country to date. So it's been a very, very heavy thing to just have to tell people who are younger about. They weren't alive to actually experience it, they're lucky to not have to had experienced such tragedy. But it is kind of weird, I'm not gonna lie, talking about it, because to me it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But Yeah, just sit back and think it was 20 years ago. It's a long time ago. But although it may be a long time ago, those lost will never be forgotten. So back to podcast business, Beyond the Bazaar. But thank you guys for letting me share that little bit with you. I just wanted to just speak about it a little bit, but I know you guys are here to listen to the podcast, so here we go. So in tonight's episode, I want to share with you guys another favorite creepypasta. Now, I know I always say that these are my favorite, or this episode is my favorite, or I just have a lot of creepypastas that I like. And the creepypasta that I would like to share with you guys tonight is credited to aCJohnson. It's one of my favorites because of the way it reads, and you'll see at the end why I love it so much. And I'll, of course, per usual, share my thoughts and opinions with you guys and why I love the creepypasta as much as I do. So with that being said, here's tonight's podcast episode of Creepypasta by aCJohnson, known as Doors. I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember. I loved my adopted family, though. They were so kind to me. I ate well, I lived in a warm and comfortable house, and I got to stay up pretty late. Let me tell you about my family real fast. First, there's my mother. I never called her mom or anything like that. I just called her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind at all, though. I called her that for so long, I don't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. I think that she is the one who recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in the front of the television, and she would tickle my back with her nails. She is one of those Hollywood mothers. Second, there's Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think that no matter what I called him, he would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable, so I didn't really press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line, and it's because of his methods. Lastly is my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms, so because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was little, I had a pallet set up for me next to her bed on the floor. This is where I have slept since. But it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her, and I always felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me into a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down the hall to the living room. That's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never any good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. My sense of time was horrible. But nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from her church's youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me, and then was followed in by Dad and Janice. "You have a good nap?" Janice said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her. "Don't you snort at your mother like that," said my father gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung up his coat. I was clearly joking, I growled under my breath. He must not have heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day, you know, the usual teenage girl stuff, but I listened so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV, and I obliged, and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother-like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that, instead of watching cartoons and soap operas, would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and National Geographic. I liked those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that could hold my attention. So it got late and Janice walked up behind the sofa. "Emily, it's past your bedtime. Turn off the television and go to your room." "You too," she pointed at me. Emily turned off the program we were watching grudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway to our room. As I followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We went into our room, and Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of the movement out of the corner of my eye. It was out the window, but as soon as I redirected my line of sight to where the window was no longer in my peripheral vision, what it was I thought I saw was gone. I still remained alert, for my sister's sake. I laid there in the darkness, with nothing but the thin ray of light from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn that I heard subtle sounds just out the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, clothes jostling, and all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat and blood. I kept my eyes open most of the night. The sounds outside subsided, and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. My eyelids closed. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the house. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house," I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up," I shrilled, pleaded with Emily. She did. As soon as I saw her sit up, I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it, off the bed and onto the floor. I saw that the master's bathroom's door was closed, and just before it, on the outside, was a man. A man. I don't feel comfortable calling it that. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt with blood dripping off. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. He saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of crooked yellow teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die, but then he turned back to the bathroom door completely unperturbed by my presence. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through the door. That was my mom's only protection. I watched as he raised the large razor that he was carrying, but had obviously neglected to use it properly. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. Then I heard something, the last thing I wanted to hear. It was Emily screaming coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up and quickly started walking toward us. My sis turned and ran. I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight after her. Why was she still in the house? Had she not assessed the situation and run? Apparently not. And now, she was dead, and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her as he had the rest of my family, but I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come to my aid. He mustn't take her, not her. As he passed me, I backed against the wall and whimpered with terror. Why? He didn't respond except by putting his free hand on my head, while Emily screamed in the other and saying, "Good boy." He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. Good boy. I followed him to the door where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I am now sitting in the house with my mutilated adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing God knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here, looking at the front door. I look down at my paws. If only I could open doors. See, there's a twist. That's the twist, and that's why it's my favorite. So when I first read through this Creepypasta a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, this is so sad. This is crazy. When I got to the end and I saw paws, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's a dog. It's it's a dog. So when I had gotten to the end and saw that it was not a person but a dog, I reread it and I saw the clues there when I reread it, like, the whole adoption thing, obviously, but that can easily, of course, go towards a child as well. Then there was even a moment where the dog was like, there's someone in the house, and it said I barked. Like, you would just think that it was just someone yelling, but no, he was actually barking. So that was a really good kind of clue there. And of course, the mother obviously wanted the dog, and the dad did not. So this was a very, very clever. It was very cleverly written, in my opinion, which is why it's one of my favorites, because it's short, just short horror. It kind of plays on the heartstrings. Anything that has anything to do with children, really, really plays on the heartstrings. And then, like, you have, you have a pet, a dog in this case, and it just still plays on the heartstrings, because children and pets, kind of just like one of those things where it's just like, protect them at all cost. Now I do remember when I first read it through, before, of course, I knew that it was actually a dog that were being told this story from the perspective of the dog. I remember saying, how come, like, this intruder is not attacking the dog, like, well, not attacking the dog, because I didn't know it was a dog at that time, but not attacking this kid, but goes for the other one. So I guess I was kind of just like, that's where I was kind of like, my gears got to turning. I was like, what's going on? And I'm like, at first I thought maybe, like, it's an imaginary person, like, they're not a real person, or maybe it's just like, a ghost thing. Like, that's what I thought. I would have never in a million years would have thought that it was being told from the POV of a house pet. And like I said, just really, really just excellent, clever thing. A way to tell a story, a point of view to tell a story. So aCJohnson knew what they were doing when they wrote this, because it's, like I said, it's short one, but it has that perfect twist at the end. But also, like, think about like how the dog felt. Like, you see like the people that you love the most being hurt, and you couldn't do anything. You couldn't help them. All you can do is just sit there and bark and just try to make as much noise as you can. Try to defend, because I'm assuming that this dog obviously is not some type of guard dog where it's prone to violence, because it gets a lot of affection, obviously. So the only thing he knew was to bark. He didn't know how to attack. He was kind of just like more of submissive, I think, which is not a bad thing at all for a pet to be, because we don't have all the details, but it's just unfortunate. Plus, he had that intuition, and he has the heightened sense of smell and hearing, so he knew something was happening. He just, well, I don't know if it's he or female or male dog. I guess I just kind of gravitate to saying he. I'm sorry, but whatever dog she was, is it's just amazing just to see it's being told from that perspective. And it's just like, the dog having the heightened sense to know something's wrong but not really be able to put it together. So actually, in hindsight, I think it was a he, because the intruder did say good boy, tell him good boy. And that's kind of horrible. Like, he's being distraught and seeing all of this, and dogs do understand tragedy. They understand, animals do understand that kind of thing. So you're telling him a good boy, you're pretty much just terrorizing him and, taking the girl, and it's just horrible. But outside of what happened, the details of the story, the way that it was written and executed was just perfection. So before I wrap up this episode, we are in the middle of September, which is very hard to believe. Like, it feels like it was just June, and now we're halfway through the month of September. But I thought for the last 2 episodes of September, we would share with you all some rituals that we know you guys love so much. We always get really great feedback on rituals. So our next 2 episodes will be about just that, rituals. And of course, we do plan on having some really spooky content for you guys for the month of Halloween as well. So stay tuned for further announcements on that, because we know you guys love the spooky season as much as we do. And we can't wait to get this spooky party rolling with you guys. But just as long as you promise to stay bizarre. Thanks for listening, and have a great night.